A lot of you are seeing Doug and Julie and I sitting up here. We're very happy that you're joining us, and we hope that this session will be very useful for you. We're going to go through some of the main questions that we've gotten about the new reporting, and if you have questions after this presentation is over, you can send emails to me along the way, and I will be trying to keep up with them. We won't probably interrupt the presentations for the questions. We'll have everybody go along, but because it'll be too hard to intersperse for me the questions. But we do have some folks in the audience here. We're glad that they came. And if you folks who are actually here want clarification at the moment that somebody's talking, you can use one of the microphones there and ask a question, and that will be useful because I'm sure that some of the people who are listening online will have those very same questions. Anyway, to introduce myself, I'm Janet Banke with the Coordinating Board, and I'm going to turn it over to Doug Parker, who's going to talk to you about the big picture for the change in reporting.
Good morning, everyone. Just to go over it real quick, do you have just a real quick, there's Janet's email. If you have any questions while we're talking, you can send to her, and she'll be logging them, and we'll try to answer those at the end. Excuse me. The SLDS project, with just a quick overview of it, both TEA and we are expanding the data collection by adding the student performance and classroom level data to enhance longitudinal studies. And the outcome, we hope, will be able to develop a range of reports on students' transitions from high school to and through higher education, including the course taking patterns and the progress that they make. The two new reports, or the big new report that we've come up with, the CBM-OS, the Student Schedule Report, is going to add subject and course information for each student, credit and contact hours that they received in those courses, the grade they received, and if that course was a developmental course. Other reports affected by the S will be the two, which we took out redundant SCH course and grade information. The CBM-06 is retired after this summer. You will not need to submit it anymore. And then the CBM-08, which was expanded to include course level data on each of the faculty records. The focus of the training is on the end of semester reports. Again, the S, the Student Schedule Report, is brand new. The CBM-OE1, the end of semester report, is new. And that is basically the same information as the CBM-01, but will contain the end of semester information. And the one thing that it can contain that the CBM-01 will not contain is flex entry equals 6 to show that the student was in a course that spanned a semester, began the prior semester but ended in the current semester. And a special guest appearance by the CBM-08 faculty report, since we have quite a few questions on that lately. So why now? Why are we doing this right now? Well, the summer introduction will allow us to fine-tune the programming and the edit review process in a less high-stakes semester. Summer's a lot fewer students, a lot fewer classes, so hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to work with rather than the big semester data. And we do ask that patience for us. We're going to give it to y'all because we understand that the vendors are having some problems as well. If your vendors have any questions, I will be happy to answer those. I've been working with a couple of them for a while. There's a lot of stuff that gets pointed out not only on our end but on their end as to things we need to look at. So I think it's been really helpful. I was going to do that later. Okay. And so there's been a number of people that are asking, why in the heck are you having training the day before the due date? And it really, it does seem rather strange, but in the prior time that we got the CBM 02, we really learned that you can talk about it all you want 3 months ago, 6 months ago, but when you get down to, to the very end and you're trying to get that one thing in that, it's just better to, right now and have those questions. They may have been answered prior to this. You just didn't get the answer. This will be good. This will work out well. And then any additional training can be held as needed. I know we've got a lot of questions about the 8, so maybe that's something we'll do pretty soon here, or definitely before the fall if that's what people want to talk about. So anyway, now I'll turn it over to Julie.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Julie Eklund, and I work in the planning section. Most of you know me because of the work that I do with the CBM 002 report, the TSI report, but I've also been working quite a bit on the OOS report and the OE1 report. The reason I'm very involved in the OOS report is because we're transitioning a lot of the items from the CBM 002 report to the CBM OOS report. So I've had to understand that transition, and through the process have come to learn a lot more about the CBM OOS. Just to state it right up front, the hard questions are going to go to Doug. But no, seriously, we're going to do the best we can across the board to answer your questions today. And I do want to second what Doug said about what we've learned from past training. Through the CBM 002 process that we went through when we introduced the CBM 002 major change in 2009, we really learned that training is helpful throughout the process. And we know many of you are working on these reports right now. We're going to answer the questions you have now. Rather than go through this item by item, which is what we've done in past trainings for the CBM 002, and I know many of you were involved in trainings with Ruben and Doug, going through these reports item by item, giving your feedback, making your comments. This session is really for us to deal with the questions and the concerns that have come up throughout this process. So we're going to organize this by topic area and by questions that have come from the field, as opposed to going through item by item. We want to spare you that. We know we've done that in the past. This is kind of what we learned from the two. Start out going through item by item, but then move along to the items that really seem to be challenging folks, challenging you and also challenging us. So we're gonna work hard to cover those topics today. And again, anything that we are not able to address, we will do so in the future for you. My part of this slide is about my part of the presentation, and it gives a little bit of feedback about how I've organized it. Though Doug's going to jump in for one part. We're going to cover general topics about flex reporting, because flex reporting is different. We've had a lot of questions about flex reporting. We want to make sure we explain that as well as we can. We know additional questions are going to come up as information is submitted, but we're going to try to tackle as much as we can today. Doug's going to talk a little bit about the summer CBM 002 report transition, and I'll let him go into some detail there. Most of you would have seen, I hope by now, the memo that was sent out earlier in this week about that transition. Then I'm going to talk about reporting developmental education. I'm going to talk just about the items that have changed from the 002 to the OOS. So specifically, just go into those transition items. I'm going to talk a little bit about English for speakers of other languages, DevEd courses.
Pardon me.
Yes.
No sound, so let's wait.
Oh, we're having a problem with sound, so we're going to wait, and I'll go back through these topics again.
Welcome back, everyone. We apologize for that delay. If you've gotten my emails, you know that a server went down at the company that we contract with for broadcasting, and they have rerouted us, so we're up and running again. I've also said that if enough of the institutions want us to, we will reschedule and do another training later on. But we're going to continue with this one because we do have folks in the audience, and we know they're eager to hear what's going to be said and to ask questions too. So again, we apologize. We'll get right started. And I think we'll continue where we left off. because we're going to be posting the broadcast out there, the initial part that Doug was talking about really is kind of prelude to what Julie has to say with the training purposes. So we'll get on with Julie's part.
Good morning, everyone. We've moved up to the slide that explains how the presentation is going to be organized, at least the first part of the presentation that I'm going to be covering. We're going to be talking about flex issues. Doug's going to talk about the CBM 002 report transition. We're going to be talking about developmental education in terms of changes from the CBM 002 to the CBM 00S. English for speakers of other languages, developmental education courses, non-semester length DE, and a number of other issues that have come up in your questions to us. As I mentioned before, we are going to be talking about items, we're going to be talking about topics. In the past, we've done trainings on the CBM 00S and OE1, and we've gone through item by item. We're not choosing to do that today. We think it's important to just get into the topics that folks have questions about or that we've noticed that there have been difficulties with. So the first topic that we're going to address is flex reporting, and this is something that's going to be a real change for everyone, and so we have had numerous questions related to flex reporting. One thing I want to make everyone aware of is that we have created a table, kind of a matrix, to address flexible entry reporting examples that we think will be helpful to folks as they work through different student scenarios related to flexible entry reporting. And Janet's going to walk us through on the screen how to find this table, because in talking to some of the folks who are with us here today, not everyone has located this table and is aware of it. She is on the main page now, the main coordinating board page. You want to find the data page and then go to where the manuals are located. I'm sure all of you are aware of that. This reference table is in the appendices, and it's the first group of appendices that are clustered together. Janet's clicking on the PDF for those. It's called Appendix P, and it's located at the very end of this particular section of the appendices. And before we talk about the table specifically, I want to talk very broadly about flex reporting for the end of semester reports, because the flex is going to be done differently for end of semester reports. One thing that's very important to understand is flex remains the same for the beginning of semester reports for the CBM 001, CBM 004, etc. It's going to change for end of semester reports. We will have a Flex 1 for students in classes that begin after the census date and conclude by the end of the same semester. So those are students that you are not able to capture on the 1 because they began after the census date, but the class was finished by the end of the semester. So since this is an end of semester report, you will be able to tell us that those students were with you during the semester and report that as a Flex 1. Then we're introducing a new concept called a Flex 6. And these are students in classes that span semesters. And we'll be using this on all of the CBM 00S and CBM 00E1 and CBM 002. And this Flex 6 is not only for students who start after the census date and then conclude in a later semester. It's also for students who start at the beginning of the semester, but their class does not conclude till a later semester. Because you won't have information about those students regarding their grades and some of the detailed information we're collecting on the CBM 00S in the semester where the student began. This Flex 6 will also be used for mini-mesters and other unusual situations where you have a student enrolling in a class that in one semester that is not complete by the end. This is not to be used for instance, if you have a class that finishes by the end of the semester, but a faculty member has not submitted grades yet. And we're going to address that a little bit in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. So, Janet, if you could call up that table again, if it's available, and the folks in the audience here, we provided them a copy. We don't have time now to go through in great detail for this table, but I want to point out a couple of things. There's a table for universities, and there's a table for community and technical colleges. So make sure you're on the right one. We walk through, and we just to give you some context, we indicate how certain scenarios will be reported on the 1 and the 4, so the beginning of the semester reports, but we also indicate how they're reported on the 2, the S, and the OE1, and we've also included the 8 here because, as you all know, there have been some changes to the 8. So you can walk through for a particular scenario and see how on the items noted, the flex would be reported for students in that scenario. And we are more than happy to add situations to this table. We have had some folks call us with some other particular situations. What's important to remember is these are examples, so if you see a fall example, you'll need to translate to spring if you're looking at something for spring. So if we have an example about a fall course, to take the first one on the university table, that starts after the end of the census date and ends in the current term, that's going to be a Spring Flex 1 on item 16. It's going to be a regular entry on the CBM 002. It's going to be an FE on the 004 on item 5. It's going to be a Fall Flex Entry 1 on item 25. And when it says in those cells, if it's fall or spring, that's when the report is going to come to us. So on the 001, if it's a course that starts after the census date, we're not going to get that flex entry until spring. But on the 002, that student's going to be reported in the fall, and they're not going to be reported as a flex entry. And that's one big change we'll talk about for the 2 from past semesters, that flex entry 1s are no longer going to be reported on the 002. Any student who starts after the census date, but the class concludes by the end of the semester, that student's information is just going to be included in a regular entry for that class. It will not be identified as flex. It's a little bit different on the S. Students will be identified with a flex entry 1 if they start after the census date, but they conclude at the end of the semester. That's true also on the OE1. Many of you had questions about the differences between the 001 and the OE1. Well, this is one major difference because this is an end of the semester report, and for students who finish a class by the end of the semester, if it started after the report came in on the one after the census date, then that's going to be reported as a flex entry 1 in the semester that the course began and concluded. We had, while I'm talking about this, we also had some questions from the field about the term or the concept of when a class is organized versus when a class begins. On this table, we talked about when a class starts throughout. That's because we thought that was a more straightforward term. But what you will notice is in the university manual, we've used the term organized for years. And so folks at universities are probably nodding their head. They understand the concept of when a class is organized versus when it begins, when it starts. For community colleges, we did start using that terminology in some of the manuals, and let me explain what that means. If a class is organized before the census date, and that means that the students are enrolled, there's an understanding of all the students who are going to be enrolled. A good example of this might be a developmental education class that is part of a series of classes. The student has to sign up at the beginning of the semester for all 3, say, of a series of classes. You know the students are going to be there. The students have paid their tuition for that class, but the class itself doesn't start until after the census date. If you have all the information needed to report that class on the CBM 001, even though it started after the census date, that class would be considered organized by the census date. And you can report that class in that manner. And this is, again, something that universities have been doing for a long time. I think often they have a better sense earlier on of who's going to be in their classes. Now, if you know you're going to offer this class, but you don't know how many students are going to be there, you don't know if you're actually going to have enough to hold the class, students haven't paid, that sort of situation, that's going to be a class that's considered starting after the census date, even if you knew it was going to happen before the census date. So I hope that's helpful in clarifying the difference between when a class starts and when a class is organized. Okay, and again, please refer to that table if you get stuck on flex entry, and if there's something that you still can't get the help you need from the table, contact us, and we're happy to walk you through it. I'm sure there's some scenarios that we haven't even thought of yet. Okay, now we're going to move on to okay, and actually we have a slide that talks about how to report flex on the CBM 002, which I addressed when we were looking at the flex entry table. Let me just reiterate that only students in flex 6 classes are going to be reported on the 2 as flex students. If you try to report a 1 in that flex field on the CBM 002, you will get an error back. So please be aware of that. If you're getting errors back because you've put in a 1, it's because we are no longer having flex 1 reported on the 002. Flex 6, that's for courses that span semesters. Okay, and then I just have a slide there of the table. We've talked about that. Now we're going to move on to, and I hope briefly, the CBM 002 changes that have occurred with the introduction of the CBM 00S. So I'm sure, or I hope, most of you have been in the manuals and noticed that the 2 no longer looks the same as it did last spring. It's much shorter, and I hope you're all pleased about that. And we did the best we could to keep items as much the same as possible between this new version of the 2 and the version that's been used for the last 2 years. But I did want to walk everyone through where we have had changes, because as recently as a few weeks ago, I've been in touch with institutions that weren't aware of this change or weren't aware of what things were different. I also want to note that on the first page of the introduction of the 002 that's now online, this information, the information about what's different, is provided. There's a paragraph in the middle of the page that goes into detail about what has changed from the old 2 to the new 2. You will see in the top bullet here that we've removed items 31 to 33, 51 to 53, and 71 to 73. Those are the items about the first college level course. We will be collecting information about the first college level course on the CBM 00S. We're not going to go into a lot of detail about that today. I think most people understand that concept, but those items are removed from the 2 and they will no longer be reported. Item 12 on the earlier version of the 2 was about student waivers. That is now item number 10. It has the exact same content. It's the exact same information. So in terms of programming, you just have to make sure you switch it over. It's now item 10 and not item 12, but it is the same item. As most of you are aware, we added in the last year or altered the items having to do with ethnicity and race. So now on the 2, item 11 addresses ethnicity and item 12 addresses race. We have added a new option to items 30, 50, and 70. That has to do with the first college level course, and that's an option that links up to the CBM 00. It doesn't link up, but it refers to the CBM 00S. And I think Janet provided me a copy here with question 7. Yes, so we now have an answer option on item 30 for math, 50 for reading, and 70 for writing, where what the item is credit for first college level course, and the answer is yes, at my institution this semester reported on the CBM 00S. It's very important if you're telling us on the 002 that a student took a first college level course at your institution in this semester, that that course is reported on the CBM 00S and flagged as the first college level course on the CBM 00S. So that's probably the biggest change that we've seen, aside from all of the items that have been dropped off. And you will also notice items 80 to 92 have been removed from the CBM 002. Those are the items about the developmental education courses and course levels. We have items on the CBM 00S about developmental education courses. You will notice when you look at those items that we've added answer options and in the last, let's say, 3 or 4 months, we sent a notification, so there are now answer options on those items about non-semester length developmental education interventions. So you will need to distinguish on the OOS the difference between a developmental education course and a developmental education intervention. And for those of you who've worked with us closely, you'll know from the ACGM that there are different approval codes for the interventions versus the classes. Okay, we have one CBM 002 question that keeps coming up, and that's how do we answer items 20, 40, and 60, which are those items about the initial TSI status for students who were enrolled after the census date. And I think this is probably coming up a lot now because as we're moving away from having a flex report in the next semester, institutions are saying if someone's coming in after the census date, I have to report it in that semester because we no longer have flex 1. The class is finished by the census date. How do I tackle this? I know, and as we move to the answer here on the next slide, I know we have situations with some of you with how your programming works in your system that if a student comes after the census date, you can't change what has been captured in terms of their initial TSI status. So let me give you a couple of options for dealing with students. For a class that starts after the census date, if you're able to do this, please use the census date for that class. And you know in the manuals we have a lot of information about census dates for class, and we're on to the answer. Thanks. Please use the census date for that class to determine a student's initial TSI status. So if the census date for that particular class is October 30th, that would be the point in time where you're looking at had the student met TSI by that point in time. That's if a student is only taking a course that starts after the census date. If this student was with you for 3 other courses at the beginning of the semester, you want to get their TSI status by the traditional census date. If you have a situation where your system can't adapt for a late enrollee, as I mentioned before, it is appropriate for a student, even if they have met TSI but you did not have that information by census date, to report 0 in that initial status item. Those are items 20, 40, 60, just so to say the student hasn't met or waived. But then to report on item 24, 44, or 64, option 2, that the student had met the standard at the beginning of the semester. We have it set up in our system that this will kick back as a questionable because it's an odd situation, but when we were first developing the two, so many of you said, you know, it's hard for us if a student's test dates come in after the census date for us to go back and change their initial status. So we have our programming set up when we run reports about students in developmental education that if they're reported with a 0 in item 20, 40, or 60 and a 2 in item 24, 44, or 64, we capture that student as having met TSI at the beginning of the semester. This scenario is only for students who have not had some kind of intervention that's led them, or some kind of class that's led them to meet TSI. They really came in TSI ready, but you weren't able to capture it because of the way your system worked, or because they came in this case, after the census date. So I hope that is helpful to everyone for dealing with that situation. Now, another thing I wanted to mention, and we've had questions about this, it's important for everyone to know that we do not track students in our developmental education measures who are currently taking dual credit. We track first-time in college cohorts, and those are students who have enrolled as traditional college enrollees, not students who are in high school. So there's been a lot of questions, there's a lot of concerns about capturing dual credit students on the CBM 002. You want to capture them correctly. You can capture them as having a waiver if they haven't met TSI, or you can capture them as TSI met if they have. But these are not students that are going to be tracked when we do reports on TSI and developmental education. We track students once they have enrolled. Another important thing to remember here is if a student is dual credit and they have met TSI, even if they tested in 9th grade or 10th grade, say an early college high school student, report them as having met on this report. Then you don't have to tell us they have a waiver in that area. If you have a student whose For example, a ninth grader who's given an AccuPlacer test to see if they're ready to do dual credit courses and they don't pass the test, we don't want that information. Those students are in ninth grade. We really wouldn't expect them in many cases to be college ready. We don't want that to be what's captured as their test result in our system. So only give us test scores for students who haven't met the standard from their senior year of high school on. The initial testing really that's used for placement for when they're in college as a traditional college student. So we've had several questions related to that, and I would be happy to go into more detail at a later point if someone wishes to contact me regarding those items. Okay, now we're going to move on to English as a... Oh, do we have English as a second language item? Yes. I just wanted to briefly address this. We have sent out several memos relating to this, and we did have one question that came up as a result where we're going to give you some further information. First of all, the reason that we're tracking these English as a second language developmental education courses is to ensure equity across institutions, across community colleges, because it became aware to us in looking at the data, the reported data, that institutions were reporting ESL courses differently in different places. So different institutions had different policies. We understand some early guidance given from us was part of the reason for that, but now we want to make sure everyone's reporting correctly in the way that it's now explained in our manuals. And that is that all SIP 32 items, and these are the developmental education items in the ACGM, which includes ESOL courses, need to be reported as developmental education SCHs on the 001. So anyone taking a SIP 32 course, even if it's a student success study skills course or English as a second language course, those courses need to be reported on the one either as students enrolled in who are under the 27-hour limit or students in developmental education whose hours are over the 27-hour limit. So I did want to say that. And what the question that we had from folks is, well, what do we do if someone came to us from another institution and we have no idea what they did there for developmental education? And this is a valid question. Sometimes institutions don't have that information. The guidance that we were provided from Susan Brown, who's our assistant commissioner, is that districts need to do the best they can in terms of identifying developmental education courses that were taken at a previous institution, but that's within what they have the ability to do to look for those courses. If you are aware of those courses, they need to be considered. If you are not aware of the courses and you don't have a means to find them, or it's going to be complicated, then just do the best you can. But the critical piece about this item is that if you are in a multi-campus system that reports to us, or multi-campus district that reports to us separately as campuses, you should be tracking all the developmental education students and education hours across the system. So if you had a student who took courses at different campuses, they all need to add towards the 27-hour limit. So I think that's the key piece here. If it's not part of a district, do the best you can. If you are aware and it's clear and you've got it in your system that a student has done developmental education somewhere else, we expect you to report as such when you're reporting hours that are up to and over 27. But certainly if you're within a district that has multi-campuses, that should be something that you are keeping track of across campuses. Okay. And again, this is for community colleges, not university systems. Okay, community college districts. And universities are probably aware that it's 18 hours. But I do want to point out that at universities, ESL courses are not funded. ESL developmental education courses are not funded, just math, reading, and writing, traditional developmental education. Okay. Now I want to move on to non-semester length developmental education. Most of you, I think, are aware that we've added several paragraphs into various CBM reports about non-semester length developmental education. And if you aren't, please please look in the introductions. In many of the reports, it's at the very end of the introductory section before we move into items. As we've updated our manuals and moved into the new manuals, we've also tried to include specific information about the non-semester length developmental education in the items, to embed information in the items where we think it's critical that that information be included. It's important for institutions to know that the non-semester length interventions count towards the 18-hour rule at universities for limits on developmental education and the 27-hour limit at community colleges. So if you are reporting interventions, they do count towards those rules. And here's something that's new, and this is going to be coming out in an FAQ that will be published soon. The coordinating board has determined that, based on reading the rider related to developmental education, that if you are at a university and you are offering a developmental education student success intervention, you may receive funding for that intervention. Student success courses, developmental education, SIP 32 student success courses are not funded at universities. They never have been. So this question came up, and it was determined that yes, these courses may be funded, but only for a specific group of students. And that group of students are students who have not met the TSI standard, the Texas Success Initiative standard, or students who have not met an institution standard for placement into college-level courses. You cannot get funding for students who are placed in all college-level courses, even if those students came in and maybe didn't meet your admission standards or were considered at risk at your institution for some reason or another. This is only, the funding is only allowed for students who haven't met TSI or are not considered ready for college-level courses. As you know, universities can get funded for learning frameworks courses. This is in the ACGM. Those are the college-level learning frameworks that cover not only study skills but the higher level, some of the higher level learning concepts. So I wanted to let everyone know that that's made very clear in the FAQ that is coming out soon, as well as some other information. The only other change that we saw for non-semester length developmental education that I think is important to point out is that there was legislation that went through that now says it's up to an institution whether they wish to charge tuition or not for a non-semester length developmental intervention. This is a little different than information that was provided in a webinar that I did with James Goman and Tamara Clunas last March on non-semester length developmental education. This is a change. It relates to legislation that was passed, and now an institution may decide if they wish to charge tuition, or they may decide to not charge tuition if they do not wish for an intervention. And so that's an important piece of information for reporting officials to know. And that, again, will be covered in detail in the FAQ. Okay. Dual credit and excess hours. We've had a lot of questions about this. We have tried to clarify in the manuals the procedures for reporting excess hours for students that have taken dual credit courses. All of this goes back to some legislation 2 years ago which exempts dual credit courses from the calculation of excess hours. So if a student has taken dual credit courses, those are no longer included in those calculations. The biggest question we've had is, how does this work in terms of reporting when this goes into effect? And the key piece for this is not the date when the student did the dual credit course. A student could have done a dual credit course at any point in the past. The key piece for this is when you are doing the calculation, when calculations have been done from fall 2009 onward, a student's dual credit courses are not included. If you had a student in spring 2009 who had done dual credit courses, they were over in terms of excess hours, then it was appropriate in that semester to charge them, if this is the case at your institution, to charge them out-of-state tuition or whatever the addition is. Once we moved to fall 2009, if you are tracking that for a student and going back in time, any dual credit course is dropped. And this was another situation where the guidance we provided was to do the best you can in terms of finding those courses. Transcripts should be available that will indicate if a student was in high school, and we also have information at the coordinating board that are provided on the excess hours report. We've accommodated for the dual credit in those. Correct. So there's a memo that went out about that, and we'd be happy to provide that if there's still any confusion. But I think that most confusion had to do with when do we start counting, and as you will see in the manuals now, moving forward, because obviously it's after fall 2009, dual credit hours are not included in excess hours. Now, in going through the manuals, you need to read the excess hours items carefully, because we have some language that means different things in different places. And we worked really hard to try to clarify this as best we could, but as can happen when you change language in a manual, we had a situation where folks said, now the language is different, maybe this doesn't mean the same thing as it meant before. So I wanted just to talk about this a little bit, that we have one situation with excess hours, and this is a situation on the university manual where it has to do with whether students are affected by the excess hour rule. And this has to do with when they came into higher education. And we're moving past dual credit students now. I want to make sure that's clear. But that item 27 on universities, and I think I had it right here. Okay. This is the student affected by undergraduate funding limits. In fact, we had a question about this come in the last couple of days. You are going to want to add a 2 if a student first enrolled in an institution of higher education in the fall of 2006 or later. They fall under the 30-hour rule. Actually, to go back to dual credit, any student who's enrolling with you after the fall of 2006, even if a student is doing dual credit, that student should be entered as a 2, because this has to do with over time, will all the courses the student takes, with the exception of those that are exempted, like dual credit and DevEd, over time, that student does fall under the rule. They started at a time when that rule was in effect. It's an enter a 1 if it's 99 to 06, and these are the same rules that were there before, and enter a 0, and that would be for students who started earlier. So I just wanted to make that clear, because we have had that question, and this has to do with the universities. There are other items where we use the term affected by the rule, and it has to do with a class or a student in a class and whether they're affected by the rule. And sometimes this is a place where, say, you're reporting semester credit hours where you don't report the dual credit or the developmental education. We tried to be very clear when we put these items, when we clarified these items in the manual, but I just want to make sure everyone looks carefully. And we're working on an excess hours chart similar to the one that we provided for Flex, and I'm going to ask the people here, do you think that would be helpful for excess hours, or are people pretty comfortable with the excess hours concept? I'm not getting a response, but I do want you in the audience who are listening in, if you feel like that would be helpful, let us know. We have a version in progress right now. Okay, I quickly want to talk about dual credit physical education hours. We have sent information out about this, but I think it's pretty straightforward that a student who is a dual credit student who is taking a physical education course can't be reported for state funding if the course is being used to meet high school physical education requirements. And this is the way the related legislation reads. However, if a student is taking a dual credit course, and it could be a phys ed course or a kinesiology course with that prefix, if it's being used to meet high school health course requirements, it may be reported for state funding. So we just wanted to add that here to make sure everyone's clear on that. This applies to two-year colleges right now, but there's a writer that's come out that suggests that this very possibly may apply to universities in a few years. So for those of you at universities, you may want to be aware of that. I don't think there's the numbers of dual credit physical education courses going on for dual credit universities as we're seeing at community colleges. Okay, we're making rapid progress. I think we're going to move on now and talk about student grades and semester credit hours on the CBM OOS. I've got on a slide here exactly what the item looks like. It's item 21, I believe, on the university report, and 24 on the community and technical college report. And we've had a lot of questions about grades. This isn't surprising because this is something new for all of you. So I want to clarify a couple of things based on the questions we've received. First of all, if a student withdraws from a class before the census date, this class is not reported on the CBM 00S. This class is not considered a withdrawal grade. The student is just not going to be reported. They're not going to be reported on the one. They withdrew before the census date. But we had folks who wanted to know, does that have to come in as a withdrawal? No, it should not. Now, we had, and I alluded to this before, if a faculty member does not submit grades in time for you to meet your deadlines for reporting, those students need to be reported with an incomplete. This shouldn't be a flex. It shouldn't show up in a later semester. Those students are going to be reported with an incomplete, and no, there is not going to be a way for you to update those later, and that's a question that has come in from several places. So it would be in everyone's best interest to try to encourage your faculty members to submit grades on time, or at least in time for the reporting process, so that you are able to give us the correct grade that a student received. Now, we've already moved, I think if you move 2 slides ahead, we covered those issues. We've had questions about the grades for E for effort or in progress. E for effort and in progress may only be used for developmental education courses which the student did not successfully complete. They may not be used for graduate students, dissertation students. In fact, there is an error check built in, so if you try to tell us that a graduate student is in progress or making an effort, it's going to kick back as an error. And I know some institutions do use that in progress designation for graduate students, which is why we put the edit check in. This was placed here because at a lot of community colleges, these are the grades that are provided for developmental education. If the institution feels like the student is moving forward, they select these grades. One thing that is critical to know, though, is these grades should not be used for DE interventions that a student successfully completes. I think it would be easy to say, yes, this is a 6-hour workshop. We're not sure what to do with the grade. You know, in progress makes sense, but it is not appropriate given the reporting system, because non-semester length interventions are reported for semester credit hours, and we're considering the students not to have successfully completed that if they are reported as in progress or E for effort. It probably makes more sense if the concern is how do we grade those, how do we build them into our system, all of that. It would probably make more sense to do a pass-fail or a credit-no credit, and you can look back to the grades, and we have a credit passed, and we have an N, no credit, did not pass. So I think that would be important. The other thing I do want to mention while I'm talking about this is for credit, no credit, do not use F, no credit, for a pass-fail course. And I know this is in the instructions, but I just want to remind people, use N for no credit, did not pass, and 8 for credit passed for those pass-fail courses. Okay. We've had questions about GPA, and we're going to move on to the next slide. GPA, we're collecting grade point values. We're collecting them differently than we used to collect them on the CBM 002. No longer do you add up the number of points depending on the semester credit hours. We just want the straight-out grade point value. So an A is going to be a 4.00 or a 4.0. It's not going to be 12 points the way it would have been for a 3 SCH class in the past on the 2. This is different. Please note that, and you'll get errors back if it's not done correctly. But I just want to make sure everyone's very aware of that. We are collecting GPA for developmental education courses. We have not done that before. Please know that we are not going to, if we're doing reports and doing a college level GPA, we will not incorporate those GPAs. So I think people were concerned about that. We wanted this information so that if we're doing special reports about developmental education, we will have the information about how students are performing in developmental education courses. So I just wanted to mention, please include those. If a student has a grade that isn't an A through F, leave the item blank about the point value of the grade. And this question came up as recently as yesterday. Do not report 3 zeros. That is what you should report if the student received an F. So if the grade is not A through F, leave it blank. If the grade is pass-fail, if it's credit or no credit, that 8 or N I was talking about earlier, leave it blank. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to let Doug, yes, in fact, Doug is going to respond. We have Lincoln Holmes with us here from UT, and Doug he asked a specific question because I think they have a 4.3 grade. So Doug's going to talk about that shortly. Okay, and question 3. We had a question come in about if a course is canceled after the census date, what happens in terms of the grade? If your institution is canceling the course, I know this is rare, but every once in a while maybe an instructor gets sick, another instructor can't pick up the course, something happens and a course is canceled after the census date. That course should be reported on the S, and that student should be reported with an incomplete. We don't want it reported as a withdrawal or a drop because we don't want it to be an issue in terms of 6 drop rule. So please report that student with an incomplete. It's not going to be a problem for the information for the students. It's not something that's going to be, averaged into a GPA or anything like that. We just don't want it showing up as a drop or withdrawal where our assumption is the student dropped or the student withdrew. Okay. Okay, and let's see. The other thing I just wanted to point out is the third bullet on the last one. Just please do make sure you look carefully at how those grade points are calculated. A 2.5 is going to be a 250. A 3.8 is going to be a 380. So do be sure to take a look at those and how we've set that up in terms of reporting. Okay, and I think we're at the point now we're going to move over to Doug, and again we apologize that we're now at 11 since we did start 45 minutes late. I'm going to let Janet wants to say something first.
Yeah, I have gotten a question. I'm getting lots of emails, mostly because of the problems with the webcast, so it's a little bit hard for me to figure out which ones are actually information and which ones are letting me know you're still having trouble. But we got a question that asked you, Julie, to repeat the expectations as far as grades are concerned for thesis and dissertation courses. They don't award a grade until they finish their dissertation.
Okay. For the thesis and dissertation courses, and I'm going to look to Doug when I say this, and he will make a face at me if I'm making an incorrect assumption because we haven't talked about this specifically. I think our assumption is that a student will be given a credit or passed for those courses. It'll be an 8. Would that be? If there is no grade, this is for students if they're doing thesis or dissertation courses and a grade must be included. The other option I think would be an I for incomplete. And that might be, do you think that would be an institutional decision, which they would choose?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Okay, so we'll leave that up to the institution, but certainly it shouldn't be a withdrawn unless the student did withdraw. But if your system is set up that they're given credit just as they move forward for those hours, you can do it as credit passed. But if you want to do it as incomplete because it really isn't till the end of the process that the student officially receives credit, then you can do it as an incomplete as you move through and then do it as a credit passed when the student completes those dissertation hour requirements. And that again would be an institutional decision. In terms of no credit did not pass, in terms of how we use the data, I would prefer that that's not selected. Would you agree, Doug? Just in case we're doing some research and that might suggest that there was some kind of negative action that stopped the student from moving forward. If there were, then that might be an appropriate option. Very, very good question. Thank you.
Here's another grade-related question that's come in. A grade of incomplete is a big change and causes the student problems, not the instructor.
Is this for the situation where the instructor reports the grades late? Is that
coming from?
Okay.
It came from Connie.
Okay.
I forwarded it to you.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure exactly what.
Yeah, it probably won't be a problem for us because we're not going to be doing anything with it, but maybe more a campus level issue.
Well, this may be in reference to with the data information system y'all use, DataTel. During one of the meetings, they had mentioned that if a student didn't have a grade in a class, that student information wouldn't be picked up. And, you know, that caused a concern if we were to ever go to end of semester funding for that student not to be included in the, or for the class would not be included in the semester credit hours, contact hours would not be included. Again, that's probably some modification that they could do at some point, but right now if you get an incomplete in a class, if we were, as we've discussed in the past, if we were ever to go to end of semester funding, an incomplete would still be, I mean, the semester credit hours would not be skipped because that student was in that class at the end of the class, but for whatever reason a grade was not provided for that class, whether the instructor didn't provide a grade or get the grades in on time, or the student, something happened and the student was allowed to take an I and then make it up, do whatever work they needed to later.
Okay. Thank you, Janet. Any other questions related to grades? Then I think I'm going to turn it over to Doug Parker, our fearless leader in this process, and he's going to be addressing a lot of, I think, specific items and questions that we have been asked. Doug is the director of our Education Data Center.
Thanks, Julie. What's up on the board or on the slide right now, again, just kind of addresses what we had talked about at first. I know maybe many of you have missed that. It's at the first of the presentation, but the difference between the 1 and the E1, basically the E1 is going to include all students who took a class that ended that semester. The 001 will only reflect enrollments as of census date of that semester. The changes for the flex entry of 6 will be available to the E1, will not be on the 001. And then we'll also need the OE1 so we can verify the enrollments against all other reports. The OOS and the 008 will be involved in that as well. And again, possible change from census date funding to end of semester funding. You know, again, the student, if the class ended that semester and we were ever to go to end of semester funding, we would need to know the students that took classes that semester so we can verify the contact hours or the semester credit hours that were generated. Let's see, other issues we're looking at. A number of folks have asked us about extensions to submission date, you know, due tomorrow. I can understand. I think I got a question or a email from the folks that are working with the banner, the Texas Consortium, and they're still getting updates to their software. It'd be, I mean, it would really be good if you could get a submission in tomorrow. But we understand that, you know, last minute problems happen, and you know, just to do the best you can. You know, don't take this as a 1 month extension, but you know, please try to get your folks on it and get something in. Let's see. We've had a lot of questions or had a lot of kickbacks on the report that that goes between the CBM 08 and the CBM OS, checking on the courses in the CBM OS to make sure that they've been reported on the 8 and vice versa. It appears that a number of people are using a composite code of blanks on the S and 00 on the 8. Is that correct? Not vice versa. Okay. 00 is looked at as a composite of some kind, so blanks don't equal zeros. So you know, check on that if your report is kicking out everybody. It's a university issue right now, but it could very well be a CTC issue in the fall. So all the community colleges, y'all start checking on that as well when you start testing your CBM 08s. Since at least the community colleges don't do an 8 for the summer, so right now they're kind of getting a little break at least on that. let's see. On the current issues we're working on, the slide that's up right now, earlier, again, right at the first of the presentation, which some of you may, or most of you may have missed, we kind of asked for, patience. I know y'all are under a lot of stress with all that, so are we. Just to give you a bit of information, the lead programmer who works on our edit programs, he lives in the Smithville Bastrop area, and his house was caught up in the big fire. So he is back online now, pretty much all time, but we lost a couple of weeks there. It's much more important for him to get his stuff taken care of than all that. So he's been really good, and we've been in touch with him, and I think he's back online. Here's the current issues that we know that we're working on, and we'll try to get done here within the next few days. The CBM OS is got duplicate student counts on there. Multiple student records or multiple class records per student. So that's really inflating things. It makes it look funny, so we're working on that. The OOS and OE1 matching reports, there's apparently a problem with the flex entry matching. We're working on that as well. We're going to increase the upper limit of a grade of A so that A plus can be reported with a point value greater than 4. There is a possibility that not all unfunded semester credit hours are included in the CBM OS SCH reports. We're going to investigate that and see what's going on. The ethnic origin count is still duplicated in the CBM 08 edit summary report. We got everything else but that one, so hopefully we'll get that in by early next week. And for this community college, a flexible entry value of 6 is rejecting in the CBM OE1, which it should not, and that's probably causing a lot of mismatches as well. And then span flex entry count needs to be added to the CBM OE1 edit summary, so y'all can see how many folks y'all are reporting there.
Can I jump in for a second, too? There were a couple other things that we have gotten fixed, but they might have been a problem if people sent their data in a little while back. And one is that the first college-level course item that I was talking about on the CBM 002 that we added an answer option 4 to, that was kicking back for a while, and so institutions were getting an error on that. That has been corrected, I think, this week. So you should be okay now if you've reported in the past and that didn't work. There should be full answer options now on the CBM 002 on that item.
Yes, and kind of to echo that, we had a number of modifications in at the end of last week. The biggest one was on the CBM 08, the way that the salaries were calculated. They were being calculated incorrectly. Again, with the multiple records, that was corrected. We've got some other questions in. Did you want to do the cohort one?
Okay, now we're getting questions that are just coming now, so please be patient while I read through. This has to do with the cohort of CBM OOS and CBM OE1. All students enrolled in classes that start before or after the census date and finish during the particular term, those students are included on the OOS and OE1. And I also want to point out that there should be a match between the CBM OOS for students who are undergraduates and the CBM 002. And I think we had an issue with that. On this end, that has been resolved, is my understanding, but it's important for institutions to know we're not looking at the graduate students on the S when we're comparing the S to the 002. And then we have flex from a previous, and actually, we have this actually was an earlier question. This has to do with students who are being reported as a Flex 6. The students who are being reported as a Flex 6 will show up in the following semester. They're going to show up actually when the course concludes. It might even be 2 semesters later. So anytime you've got a Flex 6, it's a course that spans semesters, and you're going to be reporting that in the semester that the course concludes. So those students are not going to be reported on the OE1 in the semester that class begins for that course, for that particular course. And the other important thing about the Flex 6 is to make sure, and I said this before, it's for students it can be for students who start at the beginning of the semester, or who start before the census date. Okay.
All righty. We also had we just had a question about when we would do CBM 08 training. I think that's something we're going to have to just discuss internally, see what, after we make all these corrections, see if everybody is still needing to, have us talk about it. Was this from a community college or from a university? Okay. Yeah, send in any questions you would like for us to talk about on the CBM 08. And if we can't, if it seems like people are still not quite seeing what we need from it, then we can definitely try to make something else out. On that vein, we had a question about the CBM 08 versus CBM OS reports. Just a quick overview. Again, we want to make sure all the classes reported by faculty members on the 8 have students in them from the S, and then vice versa, all classes reported for students on the S that have a faculty member associated with them on the 8. The question is, why are these reports including classes that are in both reports? I assume there's a mismatch. We'll need to look at that as well, just to see that could be the possibility that this is part of the flex entry problem. Then we also had a question in the CBM 08 manual. This is for universities. It says there's a paragraph in there that says all faculty on the CBM OS, including teaching assistants, must be included on the CBM 08. I believe that was on the first page of the instructions. Unfortunately, I think that was some wording that had been there when we had initially proposed that the 8 contain the faculty member ID for each of those classes, and that was subsequently removed, and we're just matching class to the 8, so the classes were put on the 8 instead. So we'll do a modification on that wording in there. It'll probably say something like all classes included on the S must also be included for within the faculty member record on the CBM 08. Let's see. Yes.
I have two more questions while Doug reads the next one that came in. We've had questions about whether on the OOS institutions should report the actual dates that a class occurred or the semester dates. And the key here is if you have a class that's close, if a class starts on a Wednesday and your semester starts on Monday, consider that the regular semester date. You don't have to report that Wednesday on the CBM OOS for when that class starts. But if you have a class that's starting 5 weeks later and finishing 2 weeks later, and some of this is going to become important if you're doing interventions in DE and more and more non-traditional courses, we want to gather that data. We want to know how long classes are lasting, even if they're traditional courses in terms of the material, if they're compressed courses, that sort of thing. That's important information for us. us. So if it's close enough, report it with the regular semester dates, and I think that would be easier for you in your systems. And we'll let you make that final decision. But just as you've done in the past, you know, if it starts the first week, whenever the first class day is, as long as it's, you know, the traditional semester length class, you can report those dates the same. But if it's something that's different, that's starting 3 weeks later, that's happening in a mini-mester, whatever the case may be, especially with those flex 6s, you know, if something's spanning, we want to know the actual dates that the course occurred. So I hope that's helpful. And then also I wanted to point out one change that we made to the manual, and I know all of you, it's in some ways it's easy to have a manual that's been printed out because you can have it right there in your notebook, and I actually have, you know, some of mine here that I work with a lot, but we have been making a lot of changes as we move forward with these manuals as questions have come in and we realize that we've had issues. So please, when in doubt, go online to see if we've made a change. And one particular instance of this is item number 13, and this is on the CBM OOS, and it has to do with a class taken by seniors within 12 hours of graduation. This has now been changed to the graduate level class taken within 12 hours of graduation. So that was a key piece that somehow slipped through the cracks when we were working on that. So that change has been made, and if you don't see it in your manual because you printed it out a while ago, which is a great idea, you might want to switch out that page. Thanks. Doug?
Okay. We have another question. If a student drops all classes after census day, that person in the classes should still be reported in the E1 and the S? Yes, if you have that. This may be in reference to a person withdrawing from the university. I believe there had been some discussion at some point in the past where if a student withdraws from the university, that they would have no information for that student at the end of the semester, and that may be a student information or an SIS specific question. But if you do have that information available, then yes, you should go ahead and report it to us. We have another one. If a student drops one class after census day but takes another one, that person should be reported with both courses in the CBM OOS. Yes, again, I can only guess that just the student just dropped the class and then picked up another and was allowed to pick up another one. So class 1 would be reported in the course grade item with a 7 drop, and class 2 would be reported with the grade earned at the end of the semester in the course. Let's see, we've got one. We know that if students enrolled after census date, they're not reported in the 1 and 4, but they are reported in the S and E1. How about courses created after the census date? Do we need to report them in the S even though we didn't report them in the CBM 04? Yes, with a flex entry value of 1, as long as that class finished by the end of semester. If not, then it'll be a 6 in the next semester, and that will be reported in the next semester CBM 04 as a flex entry course. Let's see. Do you have any others? Or?
I think that's...
Okay, I've got one other that's kind of involved, I guess, but it's about an interinstitutional course. And in interinstitutional courses, the receiving institution, you've got providing and receiving institutions. The receiving institution does not report their students that are taking that class on the 004 because they do not get funding for those hours because the providing institution is teaching. They are reported on CBM 01 as interinstitutional so they can have the head count. The question is why are they needed on the 004? I'm assuming that I reread the manual and we do talk about it. I think we may have some wording again in the manual that may not be correct. I think they may have really meant to say why are they needed on the OOS. They would not know about that or necessarily know what the student was taking, what grade they got in there. So I think we're going to need to review the manual talking about interinstitutional courses on the S because they should not be included on the S. They will be included on the O01 and the OE1, but not on the 4 or the S. And have we had anything more come in?
We have several questions about the 8, but I think we're going to leave those for now, and we will try to schedule some training, particularly for the universities later on the 8. But we did get one about flex entry. I understand how to enter data for the fall and spring, but I'm confused regarding the summer. In the past, we always included August mini-mesters with the fall report. Is that still correct?
Okay, if it's an August mini-mester that's happening after the end of summer 2, or I should say that it's concluding after the end of summer 2, then it is correct. That will be reported in the fall, and it will be reported as a Flex 6 because it's considered to span semesters. If it's a mini-mester that is concluded by the end of the regular semester, which doesn't seem logical, you probably wouldn't call it a special semester or mini-mester, then it will just be reported on the regular report. So again, anything that is unusual and that it's concluding after the end of the semester, so you are unable to tell us the information about that course on our end of semester reports, then that becomes a Flex 6. It's a course that spans semesters, and again, this doesn't include faculty grades being late, but when the course actually concludes later than the end of the semester, then that is a Flex 6 and is reported in the next semester. And I think we could probably, if that's something that's common in institutions, we could probably add an example similar to that to our Flex chart.
Okay. I don't have any other questions, but of course we did get a lot of comments, most of them on the bad transmission. And again, we apologize, at least fortunately for us and our staff, it wasn't anything that happened here at the coordinating board, which I'm glad to know about. But we do apologize again. The slides that we have here will be posted online. I will send you that link. I've always said that in 3 or 4 days we'd get this session posted. I think we probably will need to review it pretty carefully to make sure that there's sound with it. We think the sound shouldn't be a problem because it was only that sound that was being and visuals being sent outside beyond the coordinating board. So we're hoping that we won't have to make too many edits to that so that we'll get it posted. We'll send announcement about that again as soon as possible. I've had comments that an excess hours chart would be good.
Okay,
and we'll
great.
go ahead and do that. And also lots of requests for a rebroadcast. I think probably what we'll do is go ahead and get this out as quickly as we can so that people can really be using it. But I have had the comments that it would actually be better once they have actually submitted their reports and gotten their error messages back, that at that time they would have a better idea of what the real questions are, the things that they aren't going through correctly. So we'll probably try to do within the next week or two another broadcast. It'll depend upon our ability to access this space and of course the ability of the company that sends it out to make sure that works. So we'll get on that, and at that time we will talk about the 008 for the universities. We'll probably leave that to the end of the presentation so that the community colleges wouldn't have to listen to it at this time, but it is something that eventually community colleges will have to be dealing with. Again, we apologize. We thank you very much for listening. It was rewarding to see that so many people were trying to listen to us, but we're very sorry it didn't work better than it did. But we'll get the information out to you on how you can access this. And once again, for those of you who are here, any questions for us?
This is Tia Lissy with UT Austin, and I'm brand new. So with Lincoln's help and assistance here, we were looking over something very similar to the upper limit on the A. In our law school, the F grade value is not a 0 for them. They actually have it at 1.30. And so an idea of whether that would be adjusted as well, or maybe have it come back as a questionable versus an error.
So somebody getting an A would get 3 grade points instead of 4.
Their A is, A is 4, and they also have an A plus, which is 4.3, and then their Fs are 1.3.
Their Fs are 1.3?
Right.
So the edit check, it's going to kick back as an error because we don't allow an F to be
Right.
to look like a D. It's an F masquerading as a D.
Okay. Do you think other institutions
versa.
have this same type of deal? Probably not. Okay.
We know lawyers are unique.
If anybody's listening and they do have the same type of deal, could you email me? Probably put in an edit check and just limit it to UT for that. So if anybody else is out there who does kind of the same thing with the law schools or any other type of thing, if you could email me, and then so we can get that change made.
Any other questions? Well, we know we kept you longer than you intended, but we're glad, at least for those who are here, that they stayed and didn't give up on us, and we hope that at least some of you online have been able to hear. I've heard from a few who never did get their sound back, so again, we apologize for that, but we'll try to reschedule or schedule again something that'll be a little bit different than this presentation, and we will get these slides posted and the presentation also. So thank you very much for listening and trying to listen. Bye-bye.
Thanks.